All right, continuing from the previous, question 11 from the formative assessment. See the caveats as noted. Suppose demand for a good is QD, big Q, okay, demand for the whole industry, perhaps, equals 100 minus P at every price. This is the amount that we demanded. And supply is quantity supplied is equal to P minus 20 or negative 20 plus P. So quantity demanded is decreasing in price. Quantity supplied, quantity of firms are willing to supply, is increasing in price. What is the consumer surplus? Note, i.e. warning, this problem requires some calculation. Okay, and there's a set of potential answers, but why don't I just calculate the consumer surplus? Because this is essentially a numerical problem. Sorry if the mic was not plugged right before. This is essentially a numerical problem. This is a solved problem that's being framed as a multiple choice, but you probably won't be able to get the answer to this without actually doing the computation. Okay, so what might I want to calculate? Well, I'm looking for the consumer surplus. Presumably, they mean the consumer surplus if price is in equilibrium. Sometimes you can't spell out every clause in a question, but you have to make assumptions like that. So if price and quantity are at their equilibrium levels. Okay, so we're going to have some downward sloping demand curve and some upward sloping supply curve. We know what the slopes and intercepts will be. We know what the slopes and intercepts will be at a price of what? Okay, so in fact, let me make this bigger. Okay, so quantity demanded. Let's think. Where does the quantity demanded? And by the way, I labeled this incorrectly. Supply goes here, demand goes here. Okay. What will be the quantity? What will be? This is the price axis. This is the quantities axis. Where do these start? Well, what will be the maximum price that any consumer that will get any consumer will buy the first unit of this product? In other words, where do we have 100 minus P equals to 0? Well, rearrange this. 100 minus P equals to 0. 100 equals P. So at P of 100, we see quantity demanded equals 0. So let's start this up here at 100. 100 is the highest price that the first consumer would just be willing to consume that first unit. Okay, so they must get at the margin just 100 for that first tiny fraction of a unit. And it's downward sloping. The slope here we don't have to worry about at this point, but it seems to have a slope of -1 if these axes are to scale. Okay, now what is the price, the minimum price at which some firm will be willing to supply some unit of this good? Well, quantity supplied equals -20 plus P, so -20 plus P, set that equals to 0. We get minimum P is equal, we could call it P minimum if you like, equals to 20. All right, so we start this down here at 20. And it's upward sloping with what slope? Turns out to be slope 1. Okay, so I could solve this via graphing, but I wouldn't recommend it. What we want to do, we're looking for the consumer surplus, okay, at the equilibrium price and quantity. So we need, in other words, we're looking to measure this triangle here, which tells us the consumer surplus. The argument being is that some consumer, this is a little bit loose, but it's precise if we're talking about a single consumer. First unit, they're willing to pay 100, but they only have to pay whatever this price is. So they get this much in extra value. They would have been willing to pay this much extra over and above the price P star that they have to pay. Okay, second unit, this much, less this much, third unit, this unit, fourth, etc., until we get to the point at the price that they're actually paying, they would be, at this price, the last unit you're just willing to buy at the price. The last consumer is just willing to buy that last unit at price P star, so they would be willing to pay no extra for that last unit. Okay, that's approximately the argument. So this will be a right triangle. What's missing here? We need to know what P star and Q star are. At what price does quantity demanded, this is quantity supplied, sorry, quantity supplied equals P minus 20 equals quantity demanded equals 100 minus P. In other words, what is the price that sets 100 minus P equal to negative 20 plus P? Well, that's just a matter of simple algebra. Okay, so we have two equations. Basically, we're solving for two equations and two unknowns, but we're focusing on the one unknown first, P. Okay, so we need that at this price, the amount consumers are willing to demand, 100 minus P, equals the amount. So the point on this line has to have a quantity the same as some point on this line. Okay, so it has to be equal to the amount the producers are willing to supply, negative 20 plus P. Now we just need to combine our terms, put P on one side, solve for it, and then put the constants on the other side, obviously. All right, so let's put P on the left-hand side. So I subtract P to both sides, so I get 100 minus 2P equals negative 20. Let me move this 100 to the other side, so I get negative 2P. Subtract 100 from both sides equals negative 120. Okay, with an equality, I can multiply both sides by a negative number. The equality is preserved, so I get 2P equals 120. Divide both sides by 2. I get P star, we can call it star now, equals 60. Okay, we could have called it star there too, I suppose. Okay, let's make sure that's what the answer I stated in the answer guide. Correct. Okay, so P star equals 60. Now, we're going to need to compute, we want to compute this triangle. So we're going to need to know the height and the base. And the area of a right triangle is half the area of the rectangle that it looks, you can see that's symmetric to. 1/2 base times height. Hopefully we all remember 1/2 base times height. Okay, so this is 0. So we've got height, right? So because we know that P star is 60, and the price that's the maximum any consumer is willing to pay is 100. So we're trying to construct consumer surplus is going to equal to 1/2 100 minus 60, right? This distance being 40. Okay, 1/2 40 times, and now I think for geometrically you're going to guess what Q is, but we also have a nice formula for Q we can plug it right into. In fact, either of these it will work. So if P is 60, because we know it's quantity demand is equal to quantity supplied at this point, so if P is 60, quantity demand is 100 minus 60, or 40. And also checking our work, if it's 60, quantity supplied is 60 minus 20, or 40. So at this point, Q star in this case is 40. The distance between 0 and 40 is obviously 40. 1/2 40 times 40. 40 times 40 is 1600. Half of that equals 800. So we have 800 in consumer surplus. Okay? Reminding us what consumer surplus means is that consumers, or a consumer, if this is just a single consumer, would be willing to pay 800 for the right to purchase this product at its equilibrium price here of 60 relative to not being able to purchase it at all. Okay, I'm going to stop and record the next question.